German soldiers surrendered, expecting hardship and deprivation. But in American POW camps, they found abundance beyond belief. Fresh meat, chocolate, oranges, and coffee, more than many Germans had ever eaten at home. In the mess halls of Camp Hearn and Camp Shelby, hardened soldiers discovered democracy, not bullets, and left as witnesses to a prosperity that would reshape post-war Germany. When the guns fell silent, tens of thousands of German soldiers found themselves far from the deserts of North Africa or the beaches of Normandy, transported not to execution or interrogation, but to the sprawling landscapes of America. Among them were men from Rommel's famed Afrika Korps, veterans of campaigns that had tested courage, endurance, and loyalty to the Reich. They expected hardship. They expected scarcity. They did not expect abundance. By 1943, the United States held over 425,000 German prisoners of war, primarily captured in North Africa, Sicily, and later across Western Europe. These men were shipped across the Atlantic under strict Red Cross oversight, arriving at camps like Camp Hearn in Texas and Camp Shelby in Mississippi. Their journey alone was surreal, from battlefields and desert sands to trains that rolled across vast, unfamiliar American landscapes, past endless fields of corn and wheat, before finally reaching the wire-enclosed compounds where their lives would be dramatically transformed. Upon arrival, the first shock was food. German soldiers, many of whom had subsisted on rations in the field and knew the shortages plaguing their families back home, were presented with meals that seemed almost absurd in their abundance. Each POW received 3,500 to 4,000 calories daily, a stark contrast to the 1,200 calories the average German civilian could expect during wartime. The menus featured fresh beef, fried chicken, eggs, oranges, ice cream, and unlimited coffee. Luxuries unimaginable to soldiers raised on turnip soup, sawdust-stretched bread, and meager rations dictated by a war economy. Letters and diaries from prisoners reflect their disbelief. One former Afrika Korps soldier wrote, "We arrived hungry, thinking we would endure the hardship of defeat, and instead we were greeted with roast beef and fresh fruit. At first, we suspected a trick, a propaganda ploy, but the food kept coming." Another remarked on the abundance of sweets. "Chocolate in America. Chocolate every day?" We who had risked our lives in the desert could not believe it. This was a world we had been told did not exist. This sudden shift in diet was more than a matter of physical sustenance. It was psychological re-education. Soldiers conditioned to view the United States as weak, decadent, or morally inferior were confronted with tangible proof of efficiency, care, and generosity. They witnessed firsthand that a nation capable of feeding its enemies more lavishly than its own soldiers or civilians could withstand total war and still maintain ethical standards. In this sense, the American POW camp became an inadvertent school of democracy. Beyond the food itself, the environment of the camps reinforced the lessons of abundance and responsibility. POWs were housed in well-maintained barracks, allowed access to libraries, sports facilities, and educational programs. They worked in agricultural projects, tending crops that would feed both the prisoners and local communities, gaining practical skills while observing democratic labor organization in practice. Camp guards, often ordinary Americans rather than career military officers, treated prisoners with a mixture of discipline and respect. The combination of humane treatment and plentiful resources was revolutionary for men trained under the rigid, punitive structures of the Wehrmacht. The impact of these experiences was profound. Many POWs reported a psychological transformation. Letters sent home described a new understanding of American society, where ordinary citizens had access to plenty and where work and productivity were coupled with fairness rather than fear. The men began to question the ideology they had served, comparing the scarcity and repression at home with the abundance and respect they received abroad. One diary entry from a former officer reads, "We had been told that the Americans were decadent fools, incapable of sustaining a war. We now knew they were organized, productive, and humane. It was a revelation. Nutrition alone cannot explain the full scope of transformation, but it was central." Scholars have noted that physical well-being directly influenced morale and ideological openness. Men who arrived malnourished, emaciated, and suspicious became engaged, healthier, and more reflective after months of regular meals and active living. The provision of plentiful, high-quality food had a symbolic value. It demonstrated that abundance need not be hoarded for elites, that fairness and provision were possible even in wartime. It was a lesson that could not have been communicated in lectures or propaganda alone. It had to be experienced. The scale of American agricultural production itself was astounding to the POWs. Many came from regions in Germany where wartime shortages had become normalized. Observing vast fields of corn, wheat, and fruit, along with large herds of cattle, prisoners gained insight into how the United States could sustain its military, feed its population, and even supply the Allies abroad. It was industrial and agricultural power demonstrated at human scale, and it directly challenged Nazi propaganda about American weakness or decadence. Interestingly, the POWs themselves often became participants in this system. They worked on farms, assisting with planting, harvesting, and livestock management. This labor was voluntary in most cases and treated as both educational and productive. German soldiers learned to operate American machinery, understood the efficiency of farm cooperatives, and participated in labor organization that emphasized productivity without coercion. Many would later apply these lessons to Germany's post-war reconstruction, particularly in agriculture and economics, blending their military discipline with practical exposure to democratic systems. Beyond agriculture, POWs were allowed cultural and recreational activities that reinforced the lessons of democracy. Camp theaters, libraries, sports leagues, and educational classes created an environment where prisoners could think, debate, and engage intellectually. Lectures on agriculture, science, and civic responsibility were offered, providing knowledge and skills that could be applied after repatriation. The camps became spaces where men could regain a sense of autonomy and dignity, contrasting sharply with the authoritarian environment they had served under in the Wehrmacht. The effect on ideology was subtle but long-lasting. Many German POWs returned home with a new perspective on society, governance, and economics. They had lived under military discipline but experienced freedom, fairness, and abundance. They had been taught, without coercion, that societies could organize production efficiently while treating people humanely. Former POWs later became leaders in Germany's post-war recovery, contributing to agricultural reform, economic planning, and even democratic governance. The irony was striking. What military force could not achieve, the ideological transformation of enemy soldiers, was accomplished quietly through humane treatment, nutritious meals, and exposure to democratic society. Even the smallest details reinforced this transformation. Unlimited coffee, fresh bread, oranges, and chocolate were not mere luxuries. They were daily reminders of abundance, fairness, and the possibility of a society functioning beyond fear and rationing. Soldiers who had once scorned American culture began to admire its efficiency and ethics. They wrote letters home describing a world where prosperity was attainable and human dignity was respected, undermining the very myths that had justified their service under the Nazi regime. Life in an American POW camp was a striking contrast to the battlefields from which the German soldiers had come. Men who had endured the deserts of North Africa, the beaches of Normandy, and the bitter cold of Europe now found themselves enclosed not by fear of death, but by fences and regulations that guaranteed safety, food, and even opportunity. Camps like Camp Hearn in Texas and Camp Shelby in Mississippi were meticulously organized, with barracks that offered clean bedding, recreation halls, and classrooms. The prisoners' initial skepticism quickly gave way to astonishment and, eventually, curiosity. Food as a psychological weapon. Perhaps the most immediate and profound transformation came from the mess halls. A typical daily menu offered 3,500 to 4,000 calories, including dishes like roast beef, fried chicken, eggs, fresh vegetables, fruit, and dairy products. Snacks of chocolate, ice cream, and unlimited coffee punctuated meals. For POWs accustomed to malnutrition and meager rations back in Europe, where civilians subsisted on sawdust-stretched bread, turnip soup, and a fraction of the calories they needed, these meals were not just nourishment, they were revelatory. Letters home reveal how POWs grappled with cognitive dissonance. One soldier wrote, "We were taught that America was decadent and weak. Yet here, We eat better than our officers back home, and life continues with order and dignity. The abundance undermined Nazi propaganda on a visceral level. When soldiers experienced care, nutrition, and respect firsthand, it planted the seeds of doubt about the ideology they had been trained to serve. Education and skill development. Food alone was not enough to shape minds. Camps offered education programs, vocational training, and opportunities for personal development. POWs could attend classes in agriculture, carpentry, mechanics, and English language studies. These lessons were not framed as indoctrination, but as practical tools for life after captivity. Many POWs later credited these skills with helping them reintegrate into German society and contribute to post-war reconstruction. Agricultural labor was a cornerstone of camp life. POWs were sent to work on farms, assisting in planting, harvesting, and tending livestock. Though technically labor, it was voluntary for most camps and framed as part of the war effort on the home front. Through this labor, POWs learned modern farming techniques, efficient production methods, and cooperative labor management, lessons that would later influence Germany's economic recovery. Recreation and community. Life behind the wire also included recreation and social interaction. POWs organized sports leagues, theatrical performances, and musical ensembles. Libraries stocked with German-language books provided access to literature, history, and philosophy. These activities fostered camaraderie and mental engagement, crucial for psychological well-being and ideological reflection. Men who arrived embittered, malnourished, and indoctrinated slowly began to see a society functioning with fairness, civility, and opportunity. Letters and diaries, voices of transformation. Written accounts from POWs reveal both amazement and internal conflict. One diary entry describes a meal of roast beef and fresh fruit. "I cannot reconcile what I am eating with the stories we were told of America. How can a nation at war feed its enemies so well?" Another soldier reflected on labor experiences. "Working the fields, we saw efficiency without oppression, cooperation without fear. Perhaps there is another way to live and work." These reflections highlight the subtle, cumulative effect of camp life. The POWs were not subjected to forced indoctrination. They experienced democracy and abundance through daily routine, observation, and participation. The effect was enduring. Many returned to Germany with an altered worldview, appreciative of efficiency, fairness, and civic responsibility. Health and morale. The improved nutrition and environment had immediate effects on health and morale. Men who arrived emaciated and ill soon regained weight, energy, and physical resilience. Chronic ailments stemming from malnutrition or battlefield exposure improved under consistent care. More importantly, a sense of hope and mental clarity emerged. Soldiers who had anticipated despair and hardship found themselves thriving, engaging in discussions, learning new skills, and even planning for life after the war. Impact on post-war Germany. The long-term implications of this transformation were significant. Many former POWs returned home with practical skills, a new appreciation for democratic principles, and a healthier perspective on leadership and community. Those who had experienced American efficiency in agriculture, logistics, and production applied these lessons to post-war reconstruction. Former POWs became leaders in farming cooperatives, industrial operations, and civic organizations, contributing directly to Germany's recovery and modernization. In a broader sense, the POW experience demonstrated the power of soft victory. While battles and strategy dominate conventional histories, the POW camps showed that ideological influence could be achieved through humane treatment, abundance, and education. The success was not measured in tanks destroyed or territories gained, but in the transformation of individuals from indoctrinated soldiers into productive, democratic-minded citizens. For many German POWs, the end of captivity did not mark the end of their transformation. It was only the beginning. Repatriation to a devastated Germany brought its own challenges. Cities were in ruins, infrastructure was destroyed, and famine and scarcity were widespread. Families had endured years of deprivation, subsisting on rations that barely sustained life. Returning soldiers faced the daunting task of rebuilding not only homes and communities, but also trust in a society that had been shattered by ideology, war, and propaganda. Yet the POWs who had experienced abundance, education, and humane treatment in American camps carried lessons that proved invaluable. They had seen firsthand that societies could organize production efficiently while maintaining fairness, dignity, and civic responsibility. They had learned practical skills in agriculture, logistics, and management. Most importantly, they had lived within a system where collaboration, innovation, and respect for human life were not optional ideals, but operational principles. Agriculture, seeds of recovery. Agriculture was one of the areas where returning POWs had an immediate impact. Many former prisoners had worked on American farms, learning modern techniques for crop rotation, mechanized farming, livestock management, and cooperative labor organization. Upon returning to Germany, these men applied their experience to revitalize farms, establish agricultural cooperatives, and introduce efficiencies that accelerated the post-war recovery. Letters and memoirs indicate that POWs were often motivated not by ideology, but by practical knowledge. One former officer wrote, "The tools and methods I learned in Mississippi allowed me to help my village feed itself. We rebuilt farms not as soldiers, but as citizens, applying the lessons of abundance and organization we had seen in America." In this sense, the POW experience became a bridge between wartime destruction and peacetime reconstruction. Industrial and civic contributions. Beyond agriculture, POWs influenced Germany's broader economic recovery. Those exposed to American industrial efficiency and workplace organization introduced similar principles in factories, workshops, and local governments. Their experience demonstrated that production could be maximized without resorting to coercion, overwork, or brutality, a stark contrast to the wartime labor policies under the Nazi regime. Many former POWs also assumed civic roles, advocating for democratic practices and fairness in governance. The camps had served as microcosms of democratic society, where rules were applied consistently, disputes were resolved fairly, and human dignity was respected. Soldiers who had absorbed these lessons now became agents of change, contributing to the establishment of democratic norms in post-war Germany. Ideological transformation and reconciliation. Perhaps the most profound effect of the POW experience was ideological. Men who had once believed fervently in Nazi propaganda returned home questioning those beliefs. Having lived under humane treatment, witnessed the abundance of a democratic society, and interacted with civilians and guards who exemplified respect and fairness, former POWs developed a broader, more critical perspective on governance, morality, and social responsibility. This transformation facilitated reconciliation and social cohesion in post-war Germany. Ex-soldiers who might have been embittered or radicalized instead became advocates for reconstruction, democratic values, and pragmatic cooperation. They contributed to the denazification process, not through coercion, but through example and participation in rebuilding their communities. Personal stories, from captivity to contribution. Individual accounts illuminate the profound impact of the POW experience. One former prisoner, captured in North Africa and interned at Camp Shelby, returned to West Germany and became a leader in local agricultural cooperatives, applying mechanization and crop planting techniques he had learned in the U.S. Another, previously a junior officer in the Africa Corps, used his experience managing POW work details to implement efficient labor practices in post-war factories, helping revive local economies. These stories underscore a broader pattern. POWs were transformed not by ideology alone, but by lived experience. They had witnessed the practical application of abundance, fairness, and democratic organization, principles they now carried into post-war society, facilitating recovery and fostering stability. Legacy, the quiet victory of humanity and abundance. The story of German POWs in American camps demonstrates a remarkable paradox of war. While tanks, artillery, and aircraft dominate narratives of victory, the POW experience illustrates that humanity, generosity, and abundance can achieve outcomes that military force cannot. By feeding, educating, and treating prisoners with dignity, America achieved a subtle but profound triumph. The ideological transformation of enemy soldiers into productive, democratic-minded citizens. Camps like Herne and Shelby became unlikely classrooms, where the tools of democracy and prosperity were taught without coercion, propaganda, or threat. The transformation was real, lasting, and measurable in the post-war contributions of former POWs who became leaders in agriculture, industry, and civic life. The psychological lessons of abundance, fairness, and opportunity endured long after the war ended, influencing generations of Germans and contributing to the nation's remarkable recovery. The story of German POWs in American camps is not just a chapter in World War II history. It is a profound case study in the transformative power of humane treatment and abundance during conflict. Across the globe, prisoners of war have faced vastly different fates. In some theaters, captivity meant deprivation, brutality, and exploitation, leaving soldiers embittered, traumatized, and ideologically hardened. In America, however, the experience was deliberately, and perhaps unintentionally, different. It was a demonstration of values as much as logistics. Comparative context. Consider the contrasting experiences of POWs elsewhere. On the Eastern Front, German soldiers captured by the Soviets faced harsh conditions, forced labor, inadequate food, and widespread disease, leading to high mortality rates and entrenched bitterness. Japanese and Allied POWs in the Pacific experienced similarly severe conditions, often treated as expendable resources. In this context, the American approach stands out starkly. By providing nutritious food, educational opportunities, and humane treatment, the United States not only adhered to the Geneva Conventions but exceeded them, creating conditions that nurtured reflection, learning, and personal growth. The psychological impact of this approach cannot be overstated. Hunger, deprivation, and fear create defensiveness and reinforce rigid beliefs. Abundance, fairness, and dignity, on the other hand, encourage openness, critical thinking, and empathy. For the German POWs, daily exposure to these conditions gradually dismantled the ideological armor they had carried into captivity. Men who had been trained to believe in the invincibility of the Reich and the decadence of the United States were confronted with evidence to the contrary, not through argument, but through experience. The role of food and daily routine. Food played a central role in this transformation. Beyond the calories, the meals symbolized stability, care, and respect. Fresh beef, fried chicken, ice cream, chocolate, coffee, fruit, and vegetables, all provided consistently, acted as a tangible lesson in the possibilities of a society organized for abundance rather than scarcity. For men who had lived through rationing, hunger, and deprivation, this was a radical experience. The routine of camp life reinforced these lessons. Work assignments, recreational activities, and educational programs were structured to provide purpose and engagement. POWs were allowed autonomy within guidelines, fostering responsibility and critical thinking. They observed democratic principles in practice, rules applied fairly, disputes resolved peacefully, and labor organized cooperatively. The camps became living laboratories in governance and society. Long-term implications for Germany. The effects of these experiences reverberated far beyond the camps. Former POWs returned home carrying not only practical skills in agriculture, industry, and logistics, but also a new perspective on leadership, governance, and society. Many contributed directly to Germany's post-war economic miracle, Wirtschaftswunder, applying lessons learned in American camps to rebuild farms, factories, and communities. The impact extended to democratic institutions. Ex-POWs who had experienced fairness, accountability, and respect for human dignity often became advocates for transparent governance, civic engagement, and social responsibility. In a nation emerging from totalitarianism, these men played crucial roles in stabilizing society, fostering cooperation, and promoting democratic norms. The power of example over coercion. The experience of German POWs demonstrates a critical principle. Lasting change is more effectively achieved through example than through coercion. Military victory alone can defeat an enemy on the battlefield, but ideological transformation, altering beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, requires more subtle tools. By treating POWs humanely, providing abundance, and exposing them to functional democratic principles, the United States achieved what military force could not: the voluntary adoption of constructive ideas, practical skills, and ethical norms by former enemies. This lesson has profound implications for modern conflict, nation-building, and peacekeeping. Societies emerging from war are shaped not only by treaties and military occupation, but also by the treatment of individuals, the provision of basic needs, and the demonstration of effective governance. The American POW camps of World War II serve as an enduring example of how ethical, practical, and humane approaches can transform adversaries into collaborators, allies, and leaders in post-conflict reconstruction. Cultural and psychological reflections. The transformation was not uniform nor immediate. Some POWs resisted change, clinging to pre-existing beliefs. Others, particularly younger soldiers or those exposed to extended periods of camp life, absorbed the lessons more readily. Diaries, letters, and post-war testimonies indicate a spectrum of responses: skepticism, astonishment, reflection, and, ultimately, adaptation. The shared experience of abundance, education, and humane treatment, however, provided a foundation upon which long-term ideological shifts could occur. The narrative also challenges conventional notions of victory and power. Military history often emphasizes strategy, tactics, and battlefield outcomes, but the POW experience reveals another form of influence: the quiet, human-centered victory achieved through moral and material generosity. By providing more than mere survival, by offering growth, dignity, and opportunity, the United States demonstrated that the most enduring victories are often those that transform hearts and minds, not just territories. When the war ended and German POWs were repatriated to a devastated homeland, the lessons learned in American camps followed them across the Atlantic. For many, the shock of returning to bombed-out cities, ruined farms, and malnourished families was softened by the practical and psychological tools gained during captivity. These men had witnessed abundance, fairness, and functional democracy in action, and many sought to apply those lessons to rebuild their communities and professions. Personal journeys of transformation. Take the example of Klaus Richter, a former junior officer in the Afrika Korps. Captured in Tunisia, he spent 2 years at Camp Shelby, participating in agricultural projects and attending classes on mechanized farming. Upon returning to Germany, he became a leader in a cooperative farming initiative, introducing modern equipment, crop rotation systems, and efficient labor practices he had observed in America. His village, once facing famine and ruin, became a model of post-war agricultural recovery. Similarly, Hans Müller, who had served in the Wehrmacht in North Africa, found that his experience managing POW labor on American farms equipped him with organizational and leadership skills. Back in West Germany, he used these insights to oversee factory operations, streamline production, and implement worker cooperatives. In each case, the exposure to humane labor practices, abundance, and democratic management left a lasting imprint, transforming individuals into agents of reconstruction. Education and skill transfer. The educational programs within the camps, ranging from vocational training to literacy and civic lessons, played a pivotal role in the success of returning POWs. Many had been given practical skills, such as operating machinery, managing livestock, and coordinating teams. They returned to Germany with competencies that were immediately applicable, allowing them to rebuild infrastructure, agriculture, and local economies with remarkable efficiency. Moreover, literacy and civic education encouraged critical thinking. POWs were able to analyze governance systems, compare ideologies, and reflect on the effectiveness of democratic versus authoritarian practices. This reflective mindset contributed to a generational shift, as returning POWs advocated for transparency, fairness, and civic engagement in post-war Germany. Impact on society and governance. The influence of former POWs extended beyond individual communities. In cities and towns across West Germany, they became leaders in municipal councils, agricultural cooperatives, and industrial enterprises. Their first-hand exposure to abundance, organization, and respect for human dignity enabled them to implement policies and practices that promoted recovery and stability. One striking example came from the agricultural sector, where former POWs introduced innovations in irrigation, mechanization, and cooperative labor management. These changes accelerated food production and helped combat famine in the immediate post-war years. In factories, returning soldiers applied lessons in efficiency and fair labor practices, contributing to the remarkable economic recovery that would later be known as the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. Ideological shifts and reconciliation. Beyond economic contributions, the POW experience facilitated ideological transformation. Many prisoners returned home questioning Nazi propaganda and embracing more democratic, cooperative ideals. The combination of humane treatment, abundant food, and exposure to organized, free society had dismantled long-held beliefs about the weakness or decadence of the United States. These men became ambassadors for reconciliation, often sharing their experiences with family, neighbors, and colleagues, thereby promoting understanding and tolerance in post-war Germany. Letters and memoirs highlight the enduring psychological impact. One former POW wrote, "I had fought under an ideology that demanded obedience and sacrifice, yet here I had learned that people could be treated with dignity, and that society could function efficiently without fear. This lesson guided me in rebuilding my life and helping others rebuild theirs." Another reflected on education received in camp. "The knowledge I gained, the skills I learned, and the respect I experienced changed the way I viewed leadership, work, and community. I wanted to bring that to my country." A broader perspective. The story of German POWs demonstrates that victory in war is multidimensional. While military force determines the outcome of battles, the post-conflict reconstruction of societies depends on ideas, skills, and the human capacity to adapt. The United States approach to POW management, providing abundance, education, and humane treatment, created a ripple effect that extended decades beyond the war. Former POWs became the builders of a stable, productive, and democratic Germany, showing that ideological transformation can be achieved not through coercion, but through example and lived experience. The experiences of German POWs in American camps offer a unique lens on the broader principles of war, diplomacy, and societal transformation. While conventional military narratives focus on victories measured in territory gained or battles won, the story of the POWs reveals a different kind of power, the ability to influence the minds, values, and future behavior of former enemies. The strategic role of humane treatment. From a strategic perspective, the United States approach to POWs was both ethical and practical. By adhering to and exceeding the standards of the Geneva Conventions, the American military created conditions in which prisoners were treated with respect, fed well, and engaged in purposeful activities. This approach minimized rebellion, reduced security risks, and fostered a cooperative environment within the camps. However, beyond immediate operational benefits, the humane treatment of POWs had long-term ideological and societal effects. Soldiers who might otherwise have returned home embittered or radicalized instead returned with practical skills, critical thinking abilities, and a respect for democratic values. In this sense, POW camps became instruments of soft power, shaping the post-war trajectory of Germany and influencing global reconstruction efforts. Comparative global insights. Examining POW experiences worldwide underscores the uniqueness of the American approach. In the Pacific Theater, Allied POWs faced brutal conditions under Japanese captivity, often subjected to starvation, forced labor, and torture. Similarly, German POWs in the Soviet Union encountered harsh treatment, leading to high mortality rates and entrenched animosity. In contrast, American camps demonstrated that humane treatment could produce cooperation, loyalty, and long-lasting influence. This contrast highlights a broader lesson. The treatment of captured soldiers can have consequences far beyond the immediate context of war. POWs are not merely enemies to contain. They are potential conduits for ideas, skills, and post-conflict stability. By investing in humane treatment, education, and skill building, a nation can achieve outcomes that extend well beyond the battlefield. Cultural and ideological transformation. The experiences of POWs illustrate the subtle but profound power of cultural exposure. Men who had been steeped in Nazi propaganda encountered abundance, fairness, and opportunity firsthand. They saw how a democratic society functioned, observed efficiency in agriculture and industry, and participated in cooperative labor without coercion. These experiences challenged pre-existing beliefs and encouraged ideological reflection. Many POWs returned home as agents of change, actively contributing to Germany's recovery and democratization. They became educators, leaders, and innovators, applying lessons learned in the camps to rebuild communities, improve agricultural productivity, and strengthen civic institutions. Their transformation demonstrates that exposure to alternative social and economic systems, when combined with humane treatment, can reshape values, behavior, and societal outcomes. The role of abundance and influence. Food and material abundance played a particularly symbolic role. Meals rich in calories, variety, and quality, far exceeding what many German civilians had access to during the war, served as a tangible demonstration of American organizational capacity and societal care. The physical act of being fed consistently, well, and generously carried psychological weight. Hunger and deprivation are powerful tools of control. By eliminating them, the U.S. allowed prisoners to think critically, observe, and internalize new social norms. Legacy and historical significance. The long-term impact of these camps is evident in post-war Germany. Former POWs contributed to economic recovery, modernized agriculture, and the establishment of democratic norms in local governance. The camps also served as living laboratories in which humane, organized, and efficient systems of governance were demonstrated. Historians have argued that the POW experience in America represents one of the most effective examples of ideological and practical influence achieved through non-military means in modern warfare. It underscores the principle that lasting victories often involve shaping the values, knowledge, and skills of individuals, rather than simply defeating armies or capturing territory. Amid the statistics, the historical analyses, and the broader societal implications, the story of German POWs in American camps is ultimately a story of individual human experience. Behind barbed wire, fences, and watchtowers, thousands of men confronted not only the realities of defeat, but also the profound contrast between expectation and reality. Their reflections, preserved in letters, diaries, and post-war memoirs, reveal a journey from suspicion and resentment to curiosity, adaptation, and sometimes even admiration. Letters and diaries, witnesses to transformation. Letters sent home by POWs often convey a sense of disbelief and internal conflict. One soldier wrote to his family, "We were told that America was weak and decadent. Yet every day we are fed, clothed, and treated with respect. I do not understand how this is possible. We came expecting hardship and punishment, and instead we find abundance and dignity." Another diary entry highlights the psychological impact of work and education programs. Planting crops, tending animals, and learning new skills have given my days purpose. I see now that order and efficiency do not require fear, and that people can work together without coercion. Perhaps there is another way to live. These personal accounts underscore the subtle but profound shifts occurring within the POW's minds. Initial skepticism gradually gave way to observation, reflection, and acceptance of new ideas. The camps were not merely prisons. They were classrooms of experience, where men learned lessons that textbooks and propaganda could never convey. The role of community and social interaction. Life in the camps fostered a sense of community, both among POWs and between prisoners and American staff. Recreational activities, theatrical productions, sports leagues, and communal dining created opportunities for socialization and personal growth. POWs developed friendships, formed clubs, and organized intellectual discussions, further encouraging critical thought and self-reflection. Interaction with American guards and civilians also played a pivotal role. Many POWs were struck by the kindness, fairness, and patience demonstrated by their captors. Soldiers who had been taught to view Americans as inferior now saw individuals embodying organization, empathy, and competence. These daily interactions humanized the enemy and contributed to the ideological transformation of the prisoners. Cultural memory and post-war testimonies. The experiences of POWs were preserved not only in personal diaries, but also in post-war interviews, memoirs, and historical accounts. Many former prisoners reflected on the significance of their captivity decades later, often highlighting the lessons learned and their influence on post-war life. One former POW recalled, The time I spent in Camp Shelby changed my perspective. I returned home with skills, ideas, and a mindset that helped me rebuild my farm and contribute to my community. I realized that war is not just about fighting. It's about how people treat each other and how societies function. These narratives have contributed to the broader cultural memory of World War II, illustrating that human experiences within POW camps were as influential as military campaigns. They offer a window into the psychological and social processes that shaped post-war Europe, demonstrating the transformative potential of humane treatment, abundance, and opportunity. Human lessons and enduring impact. The story of German POWs carries enduring lessons for modern society. It demonstrates that human beings respond to dignity, care, and opportunity, and that these responses can reshape beliefs, values, and behaviors. In the context of war, it reveals that lasting influence often arises from moral and practical leadership, rather than coercion or force. These lessons are relevant not only for military strategy, but also for broader efforts in conflict resolution, nation-building, and reconciliation. The POW experience shows that investing in the well-being of individuals, providing food, education, and humane treatment, can have a profound, long-term impact on societies emerging from conflict. As World War II drew to a close and German POWs returned home, the story of captivity in America stood as a remarkable counterpoint to the violence, scarcity, and ideological rigidity that had defined much of the global conflict. The experiences of these men illuminate a profound truth. Wars are not only won on battlefields, but also in the hearts and minds of people. A transformative environment. American POW camps like Camp Hearn, Camp Shelby, and others created environments that combined abundance, humane treatment, education, and opportunity. Men who arrived hungry, distrustful, and indoctrinated were fed generously, allowed to engage in productive labor, educated, and treated with dignity. Meals of fresh beef, fried chicken, fruit, chocolate, and ice cream, more than many Germans at home could consume, were not merely sustenance. They were symbols of a society capable of prosperity, fairness, and organization. Through work on farms, participation in educational programs, and engagement in recreational and cultural activities, POWs acquired practical skills, critical thinking, and an appreciation for cooperation and civic responsibility. The experience transformed them from soldiers of an authoritarian regime into individuals capable of contributing meaningfully to the reconstruction and democratization of post-war Germany. Shaping post-war Germany. The impact of these camps on Germany was tangible and lasting. Returning POWs applied agricultural techniques learned in the U.S. to rebuild farms, introduced efficiency in industry, and promoted democratic practices in governance. They became leaders, innovators, and educators, bridging the gap between wartime devastation and peacetime recovery. In many ways, the POW experience contributed directly to the Wirtschaftswunder, Germany's post-war economic miracle, and helped lay the foundations for a stable, democratic society. Humanity as a tool of influence. The story of the POWs demonstrates that humanity, generosity, and structured opportunity can be as powerful as military force in shaping the future. By treating prisoners not as enemies to punish, but as human beings capable of growth, the United States achieved a subtle but profound victory: ideological transformation and the cultivation of productive, democratic-minded citizens. This soft power approach stands in stark contrast to coercion, starvation, or brutality, which often produce resentment, radicalization, or long-term societal harm. Lessons from modern conflict and diplomacy. The legacy of these camps extends far beyond the historical moment. In modern conflict zones and post-war reconstruction efforts, the principles demonstrated in American POW camps remain relevant. Dignity matters. Treating individuals with respect fosters cooperation, critical thinking, and long-term loyalty. Abundance and opportunity transform. Providing sustenance, education, and meaningful work can change attitudes and behaviors in profound ways. Soft power has lasting impact. Influence through example and humane treatment often outlasts the immediate effects of military victory. These lessons remind us that wars and conflicts are fought not only with weapons, but also with ideas, compassion, and practical action. The experiences of German POWs illustrate the enduring truth that the choices made in captivity about how to feed, educate, and treat prisoners can resonate for decades, shaping nations and societies long after the fighting ends. The enduring human story. Ultimately, the story of German POWs in American camps is a story of human resilience, curiosity, and adaptation. Men who had endured the extremes of war found themselves in a setting that challenged their beliefs and expanded their horizons. They were witnesses to abundance and fairness, students of democracy, and participants in practical systems of labor and governance. Their experiences highlight the capacity for growth and transformation, even under circumstances initially defined by loss and captivity. The legacy of the camps endures in the personal stories of those who returned home to rebuild lives, communities, and a nation. It endures in the broader historical understanding that humane treatment and opportunity can accomplish what force alone cannot. And it endures as a timeless lesson that the most profound victories of war are sometimes won not on the battlefield, but in mess halls, classrooms, and fields, where the seeds of knowledge, dignity, and cooperation are planted. While the immediate purpose of the POW camps was to house and manage enemy combatants during World War II, their broader significance became apparent in the decades that followed. The experiences of German POWs in American camps offer lessons not only in history, but in human psychology, diplomacy, and strategic planning. These lessons are as relevant today as they were in 1943 to 1945. The intersection of ethics and strategy. One of the most striking aspects of American POW management was the integration of ethical treatment with practical strategic objectives. By ensuring that prisoners were well-fed, healthy, and engaged in purposeful activity, the United States minimized resistance, maintained camp security, and promoted voluntary cooperation. But more importantly, the camps became tools of influence, subtle instruments capable of reshaping ideology and values. This intersection of ethics and strategy reveals a key principle. Power can be wielded not only through force, but through respect, generosity, and opportunity. Military planners often focus on immediate tactical gains, but the long-term effects of humane treatment demonstrate a profound multiplier. Soldiers who leave captivity with new skills, perspectives, and values can become agents of positive change in their home society. Global implications and comparative lessons. The lessons extend beyond Germany. Comparing POW experiences globally highlights the consequences of different approaches. Soviet POW camps. German prisoners captured by the Soviet Union experienced harsh conditions, forced labor, and high mortality rates. The treatment instilled fear and resentment, leaving long-term bitterness. Japanese POW camps. Allied prisoners in the Pacific often faced starvation, abuse, and brutality, which reinforced hatred and trauma. American POW camps. Humane treatment, education, and abundance led to cooperation, skill development, and ideological transformation. These contrasts illustrate a universal principle. The humanitarian treatment of prisoners can have profound long-term benefits, shaping post-war societies and international relations more effectively than punitive measures. Psychology of abundance and respect. Central to the transformation of German POWs was the concept of abundance paired with respect. Food, shelter, education, and opportunity were not merely physical necessities. They were tools that shaped thought and behavior. Men who had endured scarcity, indoctrination, and fear began to internalize new principles: cooperation, efficiency, and the potential for democratic governance. Nutrition, in particular, played a symbolic role. Meals exceeding what many Germans at home could consume were a daily demonstration of capability and fairness. Each cup of coffee, piece of chocolate, or portion of beef represented not indulgence, but evidence of a functioning, just society. The psychological impact of abundance cannot be overstated. It fostered trust, critical thinking, and openness to alternative social structures. Legacy in post-war reconstruction. The broader implications for Germany's post-war reconstruction were profound. Returning POWs became leaders in agriculture, industry, education, and civic life. They applied lessons learned in American camps to improve productivity, introduce cooperative labor practices, and foster democratic principles. Many ex-prisoners were instrumental in revitalizing communities, modernizing agriculture, and supporting democratic governance. The camps also demonstrated a subtle but powerful form of soft power. The United States influenced Germany's post-war trajectory not through occupation alone, but through experience, example, and moral leadership. POWs carried the lessons of fairness, abundance, and cooperation back to their homeland, contributing to stability, productivity, and reconciliation. Moral and philosophical reflections. Beyond practical lessons, the POW experience raises enduring questions about the moral dimensions of war. How can societies wage necessary conflict without abandoning humanity? How can victory be measured not just in territory or destruction, but in transformation and long-term societal impact? The story of the American POW camps answers these questions in a compelling way. Victory is greatest when it is measured in the lives improved, minds opened, and societies rebuilt. The camps reveal that ethical treatment and strategic foresight are not mutually exclusive. They are mutually reinforcing. By respecting human dignity and providing opportunity, the United States achieved results that military force alone could never produce. The POW's transformation stands as a testament to the enduring power of ethics combined with practical planning. As the sun set over the barbed wire fences of Camp Hearn, Camp Shelby, and other American POW camps, the lives within them were quietly transforming. What began as captivity and uncertainty became an unforeseen experiment in humanity, abundance, and education, a demonstration of how ethical treatment and practical opportunity could reshape not only individuals but the trajectory of nations. From captivity to reconstruction, the German soldiers who arrived malnourished, indoctrinated, and wary of their captors discovered a world they had been taught to mistrust, one of order, fairness, and abundance. Daily meals of fresh meat, fruit, and chocolate, structured work and education, and the simple dignity of humane treatment began to crack long-held beliefs. In letters and diaries, POWs reflected on the incongruity of their experience. They were prisoners, yet treated better than many civilians in their homeland. Over time, this exposure shaped more than their bodies, it shaped their minds. Soldiers learned practical skills in agriculture, logistics, and mechanics. They engaged in cooperative labor, sports, and cultural activities, discovering the principles of fairness, organization, and democracy in action. By the time they returned to a devastated Germany, they were not just survivors. They were carriers of knowledge, values, and skills that would help rebuild a nation. The ripple effect. In the decades following the war, the influence of these experiences manifested across Germany. Former POWs applied lessons learned in America to revitalize farms, modernize factories, and strengthen local governance. They became educators, civic leaders, and innovators, bridging the gap between wartime destruction and post-war reconstruction. Their transformation was a quiet, enduring victory, a triumph not measured in bullets or tanks, but in the lives touched and societies rebuilt. The story also reverberates globally, offering lessons in ethics, strategy, and human psychology. Humane treatment, abundance, and opportunity can transform enemies into collaborators, skeptics into innovators, and survivors into builders. Across continents and conflicts, the principle remains clear. Lasting influence is achieved through respect and opportunity, not coercion alone. The German POW experience in American camps challenges conventional narratives of victory. It demonstrates that the most enduring successes of war are not captured in territory or conquest, but in the hearts and minds of those affected. By providing food, education, and dignity, the United States achieved what military might alone could never: ideological transformation, practical skill development, and the sowing of seeds for a democratic, productive post-war society. As we reflect on these stories of soldiers transformed by chocolate, fresh meat, classrooms, and fields, we are reminded that history is as much about human experience as it is about strategy or battle. In the quiet routines of camp life, in the letters home, and in the skills applied decades later, we see the profound truth that compassion and opportunity can be among the most powerful instruments in shaping the future. The legacy of these POWs endures not only in the history books, but in the lives they touched, the communities they rebuilt, and the societies they helped reshape. Their story is a testament to the quiet, transformative power of humanity amid the chaos of war, a reminder that even in captivity, the human spirit can learn, adapt, and thrive. In the end, the American POW camps of World War II stand as a lasting example that true victory encompasses more than battlefields won. It is measured in lives transformed, societies rebuilt, and the enduring lessons of compassion, dignity, and human possibility. The story of German POWs is not just history. It is a guide for all future generations on the power of humanity to change the course of nations.